She said, "This could cost my career." I whispered and win my heart, and in that moment, everything changed. The day was unusually tense in the office. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder than usual, as if even the building was holding its breath. Phones rang, emails pinged, and the soft murmur of conversations filled the air, but there was an underlying anxiety that could not be ignored. Everyone was talking about the major client meeting that had gone south, and now it felt like the entire company's future was hanging by a thread. I sat at my desk, eyes glued to the screen, but my thoughts kept drifting toward my boss, Clara, who was working in her office down the hall. She was the one everyone turned to in times like these, the rock that kept the company grounded. At 42, she exuded confidence, always poised, always prepared. Her ability to handle the most difficult of situations with calm precision was legendary. But today, the weight of the crisis was starting to crack her composure. Clara was a woman of grace, with a magnetic presence that made her both approachable and intimidating at the same time. She carried herself with a quiet authority that came from years of experience. Even though she often wore formal attire, there was always something effortless about her style. Whether it was the way she swept her hair back or the way she moved, a quiet strength that made her seem untouchable. But today, as I glanced down the hallway toward her office, I noticed a subtle shift. The way she clutched her phone tightly in her hand. The small furrow between her brows as she spoke to the team. It was almost as if the weight of the situation was starting to wear her down. I wanted to help, but I knew my place, a junior associate, young and inexperienced in comparison to her seasoned leadership. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that surged within me every time she walked past my desk, her heels clicking lightly on the polished floors, her presence filling the space with an energy I couldn't quite describe. There was something magnetic about her, something that had intrigued me ever since I started at the company 6 months ago. As the day wore on, the pressure intensified. I could feel in my own chest, the way my heart quickened when I saw Clara leave her office, her expression tense and eyes focused. There was a part of me that wanted to step in to offer a solution, but I wasn't sure if I had the courage to approach her with my ideas, especially with the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on her. Then, just after noon, she made her way to the break room, her heels clicking in a way that seemed louder than usual. I stood up to stretch, hoping to catch her for a quick word, but before I could even take a step, I overheard her talking to one of the senior managers. Her voice, usually steady and calm, now had a slight edge to it. "This could cost my career," she said quietly, as though she didn't intend for anyone to hear. The words cut through the tension in the room, and I immediately felt the weight of her vulnerability. Clara wasn't just worried about the company. She was worried about everything she had built. Her career, her reputation, her future. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. I had never seen her like this before. Human, raw, and vulnerable. It was as if the confident woman I admired so much had suddenly become someone I could reach out to. Someone who was, in a moment of honesty, scared. The feeling of helplessness hit me like a wave. I wanted to step forward to offer my help, but I didn't know how. And yet, something inside me told me that this was a pivotal moment, a moment when our paths might cross in a way that would change everything. It wasn't just the crisis at hand that caught my attention. It was Clara, the vulnerability in her voice, the uncertainty in her posture. It was as if she were inviting someone to see her not just as a boss, but as a person. And I, despite the risks, couldn't help but want to be the one to see her, to understand her beyond the poised, professional exterior. Little did I know, this crisis would be the beginning of something more. The days following the crisis were tense, the company still reeling from the fallout. Clara seemed to carry the weight of it all alone, though I could tell she was exhausted. Her usual confidence had been replaced by a quiet intensity. Her every decision weighed heavily. As the pressure mounted, I noticed subtle shifts in her behavior. Small things like the way her hand would hover over her desk before she made a decision, or how she would stop mid-sentence, seemingly lost in thought before picking up again. It was as though she was constantly calculating her next move, always one step ahead of the chaos around her. But it wasn't just her professional demeanor that had changed. There were moments, fleeting but real, when I caught a glimpse of something more, something raw and vulnerable, hidden beneath the layers of responsibility. It was these moments that made me see her in a different light, not just as my boss, but as a person, someone carrying the same doubts and fears I often felt. One afternoon, the office was unusually quiet. The team had left for the day, and I was staying late to wrap up some paperwork. Clara was in her office, and for once, the door was slightly ajar. I could hear her voice, softer than usual, murmuring into the phone. The words were faint, but the tone caught my attention. She wasn't speaking with authority or control, but with an almost tired vulnerability. "Yeah, I know, but this situation is more complicated than you think. If this doesn't get fixed, I could lose everything," she said, her voice cracking slightly. There was a hesitation before she continued, as if she was fighting to keep herself together. I paused, unsure whether to step in or give her space. But something about the quiet despair in her voice stirred something within me. It was as if I had stumbled upon a side of Clara that no one ever saw. The confident leader had cracked, and in that moment, I saw the weight of her humanity. She wasn't just the boss. She was a woman, struggling to hold everything together. I couldn't stand there any longer, knowing that I could do something to help. I made my way down the hall and knocked lightly on her door. The sound of my knock startled her, and she quickly wiped her eyes before standing up to greet me. I could see the faintest trace of red around her eyes, though she tried to mask it with a professional smile. "Sorry to bother you," I said, my voice soft but filled with genuine concern. "I thought maybe you could use a break or, I don't know, just someone to talk to." Clara didn't say anything at first. Instead, she just stared at me for a moment, as if weighing the sincerity of my offer. Her expression was unreadable, but the vulnerability I had just witnessed lingered in the air between us. Then, without saying a word, she stepped aside and motioned for me to enter. "I'm not sure I can fix everything, but I'll listen," I added, trying to ease the weight of the moment. She sat back down at her desk, the lines of exhaustion clear on her face, and let out a long sigh. "I don't know how to fix this, but I can't let it ruin everything," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers lightly brushed the papers in front of her, but her mind seemed far away. I sat down across from her, not sure what to say, but feeling an intense urge to let her know she wasn't alone in this. "You've done more than most people could, Clara. It's not on you to fix everything alone." She looked at me then, her eyes softening for the first time in days. There was something unspoken between us, an understanding that hadn't existed before. The ice between us had finally broken, and I realized in that moment that she wasn't just the confident leader everyone looked up to. She was someone who needed support too. "I'm not used to asking for help," she admitted quietly, her voice almost fragile. "But sometimes I don't know how much longer I can carry this." I didn't know what to say to make her feel better, but I didn't need to. The sincerity in my eyes must have been enough, because she reached across the desk, her fingers brushing mine for just a moment. The touch was brief, but it sent an unexpected surge of warmth through me. It was a quiet connection, one that spoke volumes more than any words ever could. "Thank you," she whispered, her gaze lingering on me a little longer than usual. In that moment, I knew that this wasn't just a professional relationship anymore. Something had shifted, and whatever it was, I couldn't help but feel it too. We both sat there in the silence that followed, the tension between us easing, replaced by something deeper, more personal. We were no longer just boss and employee. In that moment, we were two people bound together by vulnerability, understanding, and a shared moment of connection. The days after Clara's moment of vulnerability passed in a blur, but the connection between us lingered. There was something unspoken in the air, a quiet understanding that neither of us could ignore. I saw her a bit differently now, not just as the powerful, composed boss everyone admired, but as someone who had her own doubts, insecurities, and fears. And somehow, I found myself drawn to her even more, in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. But the tension between us remained. We were still colleagues, still operating within the boundaries of professionalism. Every time I saw her, I felt the pull, a magnetic attraction that I couldn't quite shake. She was still the same person, but now I noticed the subtle changes in her. The way her lips would curl slightly when she smiled, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and the way her gaze would linger a little longer than necessary when we exchanged a glance. It was as if something was shifting between us, but neither of us dared to address it directly. One morning, we found ourselves alone in the office. Most of the team was out on a client call, and the silence in the building felt almost too intimate. I was working on some reports at my desk when Clara walked in, her footsteps echoing in the hallway before she entered. She didn't look at me immediately, but instead walked over to the window, gazing out at the city below. The tension in the room was palpable, and I felt it in the pit of my stomach. She had always carried herself with such composure, but now there was something more, a kind of quiet stillness that hinted at a storm beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. There was something I needed to say, something that had been building in me ever since that first moment of vulnerability. But I knew the risks. I knew that crossing the line could cost me more than just my job. It could change everything. But as I looked at her, standing there with her back to me, I realized that the risk wasn't just about losing my career. It was about something much deeper, the chance to lose the chance to know her. "Clara," I said, my voice quieter than usual. She turned, her eyes meeting mine for the first time since we'd spoken last. The intensity in her gaze was unmistakable. She had that familiar, controlled look, but there was an edge to it now. Her shoulders were tense, and I could see the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her blouse, something I hadn't noticed before. I continued, my heart pounding in my chest. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about everything that's happening, and I wanted to say that. I get it. I do. This is a tough time, but you don't have to carry all of this alone." She raised an eyebrow, a hint of curiosity flickering in her eyes. "I'm fine," she said, her voice carefully neutral. I wasn't convinced. I saw the way she was holding herself back, the way she tried to maintain her usual composure. There was a distance in her voice, but I could hear the cracks beneath the surface. She wasn't as fine as she claimed. I stood up from my desk and slowly walked over to her. The space between us felt charged, and I could feel the electricity in the air, thick and palpable. She didn't step back when I came closer, but she didn't move forward either. There was an almost imperceptible tension in her body, and I knew that whatever I said next could change everything. "I've been thinking about us," I blurted out, the words tumbling out faster than I intended. "About how this thing between us, this connection we've had, it's not just professional anymore. At least not for me. I know there's a lot at stake here, Clara, but I can't deny it. I think about you, and not just as my boss. I think about you as a..." Her eyes widened slightly, the surprise evident, but there was no anger, no rebuke. She just stood there, taking in my words, processing them. I saw the flash of hesitation in her eyes, the same hesitation that had been there before when she had briefly opened up to me. But this time I didn't back away. I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for her response. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions," I said quietly, my voice softer now. "I'm not asking you to throw everything away for this." But I had to say it. I had to take the risk. For a long moment, we just stood there, the silence hanging between us. I could hear the faint hum of the office building, the distant sound of traffic, but it all felt far away. The only thing that mattered in that moment was her response, her reaction, and the weight of what I had just said. And then, finally, she spoke, her voice quiet, almost unreadable. "You're right," she said, her gaze softening just the slightest bit. "This is risky, for both of us." I felt my heart skip a beat, but she didn't turn away. Instead, she took a deep breath and stepped a little closer to me. But sometimes the risks are worth taking. I held my breath, tried to process her words. It wasn't a rejection. It wasn't a promise either. But in that moment, I realized we had crossed a line. And whatever happened next, we couldn't go back to where we were before. The risk was real, but so was the connection between us. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to take that chance. The days after our conversation lingered in the air like a fog, heavy and unspoken. Clara's words echoed in my mind, but I couldn't quite settle on what they meant. She had acknowledged the risk, but she hadn't fully embraced it. That thin thread of possibility we had barely started to tug at now seemed to stretch farther away, as if the distance between us had somehow grown, despite the closeness we had shared just a moment ago. Every time I saw her after that conversation, the air between us felt charged. She was still my boss, still the calm, collected figure everyone turned to, but there was a shift I couldn't ignore. Clara's gaze, once soft and open, had become guarded again. The subtle, almost unnoticeable distance in her posture, the way she would avoid standing too close to me, spoke volumes. She no longer leaned in when we spoke, and her smile seemed forced, polite, not the easy warmth they had been before. It wasn't as if she had outright rejected me, but it felt as if she had placed a wall between us, an invisible line that she couldn't or wouldn't cross. The office became a minefield. Every interaction with her felt like a delicate dance of maintaining professionalism while suppressing the growing tension that threatened to slip out of its carefully constructed box. There were moments when I'd catch her glancing at me from the corner of her eye, her gaze shifting away just as quickly as it had met mine. Her attempts to keep things professional, to keep the distance, were palpable. She was trying, with everything in her, to ignore the spark that had ignited between us, but I wasn't sure she was trying harder to deny it to me or to herself. I found myself overthinking every little thing. Was it the way I spoke to her? The way I stood too close when discussing a project? Or was it the lingering tension in the air that both of us refused to acknowledge? I couldn't tell, but the more time passed, the more I realized I was falling for her, and the more it seemed like she was pulling away. One afternoon, I stayed late to work on a report, hoping for some quiet time of focus. The office was nearly empty, and the familiar sounds of the building, the clicking of keyboards, the soft shuffle of shoes on tile, were muted. It was just me and Clara, who was deep in conversation with one of the senior managers in her office. I overheard snippets of the conversation as I passed by, her voice steady but tense. She was discussing the crisis, the one that had initially brought us together, but this time there was no confidence in her tone. It was as though the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. "I'm doing my best, but I don't know if I can fix this," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If this doesn't work out, it could be the end of everything. I've never been so uncertain." The vulnerability in her words, the way she let down her guard even just for a second, hit me hard. I stood frozen outside the door, torn between the desire to reach out and comfort her, to remind her that she wasn't alone, and the growing awareness that I was the one she was pulling away from. I hated the way that knowledge twisted in my chest, how it made my heart ache. A few moments later, she emerged from her office, her steps slow and deliberate, as if carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. When she saw me standing near the break room, her eyes flickered briefly in my direction before she quickly averted her gaze, walking past me without a word. It was that moment that stung the most, the silence that spoke louder than anything else. I had become just another person in the office, another colleague she was keeping at arm's length. I tried to convince myself that she needed space, that she was under more stress than I could understand. But deep down, I knew what it was. She had made the decision for both of us. She had rejected the possibility of anything beyond the professional boundaries we had established. And I was left to stand on the other side of that wall, helpless and unsure of what to do. The next few days passed in a blur of forced professionalism. We exchanged pleasantries, brief updates on the ongoing projects, but there was no more laughter, no more lingering glances. The distance between us had grown not because she had said something overt, but because she had pulled back in ways that were almost imperceptible yet unmistakable. She had made her choice, a choice I feared was the end of whatever we had started or thought we had started. I sat at my desk late that evening, feeling the weight of the quiet rejection settle over me. It wasn't harsh or overt. It was just quiet, the unspoken acknowledgement that some things, no matter how strong the connection, could never be. It wasn't just the risk to my career that I feared now. It was the loss of something that, for a brief moment, had felt real. The days that followed felt like they were dragging on endlessly, each one blurring into the next. Clara had kept her distance, maintaining a professional boundary between us that I respected, though the ache of unspoken words and feelings gnawed at me. Every time I caught a glimpse of her, whether in a meeting or passing by the office door, I felt a pang of longing mixed with uncertainty. I knew she was going through a tough time, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play, something between us that we had both tried so hard to ignore. It was an early afternoon when things finally began to shift. The office was quieter than usual, the hum of distant conversations and the soft tapping of keyboards almost soothing in its monotony. I had been absorbed in my work when Clara appeared at the entrance of the office, looking as composed as ever, though there was something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, that stopped me in my tracks. She wasn't the same woman who had confidently led the team through countless challenges. There was a weariness to her that was hard to ignore. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual, a slight tremor betraying the calm facade she tried to maintain. I nodded, standing up from my desk, unsure of what was coming. Her presence in my personal space still had the same magnetic pull, but now it felt more intense, as though every step she took toward me was fraught with meaning. She gestured toward the small meeting room at the side of the office, and we both walked in, the door clicking shut behind us, leaving us in the quiet of the room with only the sound of our breathing. She stood by the window, staring out at the city below, her hands clasped in front of her. The silence between us stretched on, thick and palpable, neither of us knowing where to start. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing on my chest, the tension thickening the air around us. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her back still to me. "And I've realized that I've been avoiding something I don't want to confront. And I think it's time I admit it." My heart skipped a beat. Her words, though soft, were loaded with meaning, and I felt a surge of hope. Could she be saying what I thought she was? Was this finally the moment when she would open up, when we could move past the silence that had consumed us for so long? She turned slowly to face me, her expression conflicted, torn between hesitation and resolve. "You're right," she continued, her eyes locking with mine. "There's been something between us. Something I've tried to ignore, because it's not professional. And I told myself I couldn't afford to act on it. But the more I try to bury it, the more it's become clear to me. I can't just pretend it isn't there." Her words hit me like a wave. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Was this really happening? Was Clara finally admitting what I had feared and hoped for at the same time? My heart raced, and I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide. "I don't know how to explain it," she said, taking a tentative step closer. "But there's something about you, something I can't ignore. And I've tried to convince myself it was just professional respect, but it's not. It's more than that. I can't keep pretending it doesn't matter." The moment hung between us, fragile and yet so incredibly real. My mind was racing, struggling to process what she was saying. Was she saying she felt the same? Was this the confession I had been waiting for? Or was it just the pressure of everything finally breaking through? "Clara," my voice was barely above a whisper, the weight of her confession making it hard to find my words. I took a step toward her, the space between us closing with each movement. "I don't want you to feel like you have to hold back, like you're alone in this. If you feel this too, She cut me off, her hand gently resting on my arm, silencing me. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm scared of what this means. For both of us. But I can't keep pretending that it doesn't matter, that I don't care about you." The sincerity in her words, the honesty she had finally allowed herself to express, was more than I could have hoped for. A wave of emotion washed over me, a mix of relief, excitement, and something deeper, a feeling I hadn't let myself acknowledge until now. The weight of the unspoken between us had finally lifted, and in its place was something new, something real. "I care about you too," I said, my voice steady now, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "And I'm willing to take the risk, whatever that means for us. Together, we can figure it out." Clara's gaze softened, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the full depth of her vulnerability. She smiled, a small but genuine smile, and I knew that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than either of us had anticipated. In that moment, we both knew that the risk was no longer something we had to fear. It was the first step toward something real. And no matter what happened, we had each other's hearts, and that was all we needed to begin. The silence that had settled between us in the days following Clara's confession felt almost suffocating at times. We had acknowledged the connection between us, but there was still so much unspoken, lingering emotions that neither of us were sure how to navigate. Every day felt like we were walking a tightrope, balancing between the professional walls we had built and the undeniable pull that tugged us closer. The tension was palpable, and I could tell Clara was feeling it too. She would look at me, her eyes holding a mixture of curiosity and caution, as though she was unsure of how to move forward. It was clear that we both wanted something more, but neither of us dared to take that final step. One evening, as the office began to empty out, Clara came into the break room where I was finishing up some work. Her steps were quieter than usual, almost hesitant, as if she were carefully weighing each movement. When I looked up and met her gaze, the usual guardedness had softened, replaced by something raw, something that told me she was ready to face the truth. I could see it in her eyes. She was finally ready to speak her heart. "I've been thinking about what we talked about the other day," she began, her voice steady, but there was an unmistakable vulnerability in her tone that made my heart skip a beat. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms in front of her, her body language closed off but still present. "I've been trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out how I feel about everything. But I can't pretend it isn't there anymore." She paused, her eyes searching mine for some kind of confirmation, as though she was waiting for me to say something to give her the permission she needed to continue. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Every fiber of my being wanted to tell her that I felt the same way, that I had been thinking about nothing but her since that first, vulnerable moment between us. But this wasn't just about words. This was about something deeper, something that we had both tried to ignore, but now, in the quiet space between us, it felt impossible to deny. "I know," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about it too. I can't stop thinking about you, about us, and I don't want to ignore it anymore. I don't want to pretend that this is just some passing thing, that it doesn't matter. Because it does." She inhaled deeply, her chest rising and falling with the weight of the words she had yet to speak. She seemed almost fragile in that moment, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. It was as if the armor she had carefully constructed around herself had cracked just enough for me to see the real her, the woman who was no longer just my boss, but someone I cared for deeply. "I've been afraid," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "Afraid of what this could mean. Afraid of what it would do to both of us, professionally, personally, everything. But every time I try to push it aside, every time I tell myself it's just a phase, I realize I'm lying to myself. I care about you more than I should, and it scares the hell out of me." The weight of her confession hit me like a wave. She had finally admitted what I had been hoping for, what I had feared and longed for all at once. She cared about me. In the most vulnerable, honest way possible, she had opened up and confessed it. And in that moment, I knew that this wasn't just a fleeting attraction. It was something real, something worth fighting for. I took a slow step toward her, closing the distance between us. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't want to hesitate anymore. I wanted her to know that I was in this too, that I felt the same fears, the same uncertainties, but I was ready to take the risk with her, no matter the consequences. "Clara," I said softly, reaching out and gently touching her arm. "I'm not afraid of this. I'm not afraid of you. I know it's complicated, and I know we can't just pretend everything's simple. But I care about you, and that's not something I want to hide or ignore anymore. If we're going to do this, If we're going to explore whatever this is between us, then I'm ready. I'm ready to take the risk, even if it means everything changes." Her eyes softened, and she looked down at the floor for a moment, as if processing everything I had just said. When she finally met my gaze again, there was a faint smile on her lips, a smile that was filled with relief and maybe even a little hope. "I'm not sure where this will go," she said, her voice quieter now, more certain. "But I'm willing to find out. Together." And just like that, the weight of the unspoken between us was finally lifted. There was no more hesitation, no more fear of what could go wrong. We had both laid our cards on the table, and whatever happened next, we knew we would face it together. The path ahead was still unclear, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. We had confessed our feelings, and that, for now, was enough. As I looked at her, the woman who had been both my boss and my unexpected source of desire, I realized that the true risk wasn't in what we had just admitted to each other. The real risk was in walking away without ever knowing what we could be. And I wasn't about to let that happen. It had been a week since Clara and I had shared our confessions, and yet it felt like everything between us had shifted permanently. The air between us, once thick with unspoken words and professional barriers, was now lighter, charged with a new sense of possibility. Every interaction we had since that evening in the break room had been different. There was an ease to our conversations, an openness that hadn't been there before, but there was also a quiet understanding that this wasn't just the beginning of a romantic connection. It was the start of a new chapter in both of our lives. Clara still carried the weight of her responsibilities at work, but now there was something else, something deeper that had been added to the mix. We no longer just spoke about deadlines and client meetings. We spoke about what really mattered. There were moments when we shared a look across the office, and everything else faded away. I found myself noticing the way she smiled, just a little brighter when she saw me, how she leaned in slightly when we spoke, as though our connection had made her feel more present, more alive. But while everything between us had changed, we both knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. It wasn't just the office dynamics. It was the fear of what this relationship meant, both professionally and personally. Clara had always kept her personal life guarded, and now she was learning to navigate the vulnerability of opening up to me, someone who had once been just an employee in her team. And I, too, had to adjust to the delicate balance of being both a colleague and someone she trusted intimately. One evening, after a long day filled with endless meetings and phone calls, Clara suggested we leave the office together. It was a casual offer, but it felt significant, as if she was choosing to take a step beyond the confines of the office, beyond the role we had played in each other's professional lives. We walked out of the building side by side, the city's lights glowing softly in the distance. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter, as if the weight of the world had finally been shared between us. We didn't talk much as we strolled down the sidewalk, but the silence was comfortable, the kind that only exists between two people who don't need words to understand each other. Every so often, she would glance at me, her smile soft and genuine, her eyes no longer clouded with the stress that had consumed her for so long. We passed a small cafe on the corner, and Clara stopped, her hand brushing mine as she turned to me with a gentle smile. "Let's sit for a bit," she suggested, her voice warm but still a little uncertain, as if she was testing the waters of our new relationship. We found a table by the window, the warm light casting a glow over her face. There was something different about her now, something more open, more willing to let the world in. As we sat there, sipping our coffee, Clara spoke more freely than she had in days, telling me about the pressure she had been under, the way her mind had been constantly racing, trying to fix everything. She didn't hold back this time. She didn't try to pretend she was fine. "I didn't realize how much I needed this," she said quietly, looking down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim. "I've been so focused on holding everything together, I forgot what it felt like to just let go, to have someone to lean on." My heart swelled at her words. It wasn't just the relief I felt for her, but also the understanding that this was the first time she had truly allowed herself to trust someone completely. And it wasn't just about the support I had given her professionally. It was about the way I had seen her for who she really was beyond the polished exterior, beyond the role she played at work. "I'm here," I said softly, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm here for all of it, Clara. The good, the bad, everything in between." She looked at me then, her eyes searching mine for sincerity, and when she found it, she smiled, a smile that was full of warmth and something more, something that said she had come to terms with the vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she asked, her voice gentle but confident. I nodded, a sense of calm settling over me as I realized the truth in her words. We had crossed the line, and now there was no turning back. But in that moment, I didn't want to. Whatever the future held, I knew we would face it together. No longer just boss and employee, but two people who had allowed themselves to be vulnerable with each other, to let go of their fears, and to embrace what was starting to blossom between them. And for the first time, the future didn't seem so daunting. Whatever happened next, I knew that this us was worth it. We were no longer just living in the tension of what could be. We were living in the reality of what we had finally allowed ourselves to feel. A new beginning, one step at a time. As Clara and I continued to take those first steps together, I couldn't help but think about the risks we had taken, the boundaries we had crossed, and how far we had come. It wasn't easy, and the road ahead might not always be smooth, but the rewards, the connection, the honesty, and the vulnerability made it all worth it. If you've ever found yourself in a moment where a connection is too strong to ignore, where the unspoken words weigh heavily on your heart, remember, sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards. Don't let fear hold you back from taking that step. Whether it's in love, career, or life, embrace the journey and trust that the right connections are worth fighting for. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming, slow burn romances. And share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that changed everything for you? Let's talk about it.